Meet Richard, currently a partner at TAV and one of the most active investors in Southeast Asia, having seeded over 70 startups by the time he was 24. Being British and Thai, he perfectly bridges the gap between East and West. In today's episode, we discuss his secrets to picking winning startups, his vision for the Southeast Asian ecosystem, and managing his time while being extremely active in the media space. All right. Richie, good to have you on the podcast.
Great to be here as usual.
Yeah, actually, I'm very excited to have you on because ever since I've started this podcast, you've been one of the guests in mine.
Yeah.
Just wanted to warm up before, we got into the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
And funny enough, when I moved to Bangkok, you were probably the first person to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
To say, hey, I want to meet up. I saw you moved to Bangkok.
I guess I'm a sociable person, right?
Well, you are. And actually, it kind of led me to get interested in the power of LinkedIn to connect with people and to build a brand and to all of that. So you kind of snowballed. Well, your reach out snowballed into a lot more for me, which is what I'm doing now.
I'm glad I played a small part.
Absolutely. So, Richie, I know you quite well. We've met a few times, but for those of you who never heard of you, never met you, which are few and far between, I'm sure, can you give us a quick intro at least to get to know you?
Yeah. So look, maybe a bit about me. In terms of, I'm half Thai, half British.
Yep.
I was born in Thailand. I grew up in many countries around the world. I lived in Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, England, Ireland. So as you probably imagine, living in emerging regions to developed regions, it gives you a strong understanding of people, technology, things like that. So extremely grateful I had that opportunity. I mean, I'm still relatively young, but I've done a few things. I sort of went down a different path to everyone else when I was going to my undergrad and my final year in the UK, sort of just left and started my first company. We built brands for some of the biggest creators in Southeast Asia.
Okay.
Having that creator media background as well, I guess really helped. And essentially, profitable business. We were doing really well, selling to, I think close to 100 countries from customers where they were from. That was my first company. Then second company was in the food waste space, right? Where I was more of a co-founder there, but more of just the person that's raising capital. And afterwards went into angel investing for a bit. Did over 70 angel investments from
how many?
70.
70.
Yeah.
And you're 24.
Yeah, from pre-seed to Series A. So what the thing is, I'll tell you my advantage later as well. But I've been able to get in with relatively smaller checks as well, because of, I guess, the value I can offer for founders, right? So done quite a few deals and then ended up joining TAV as a VP, leading out the emerging markets. As I say, TAV is a global fund. They've done around 220 investments. There's 220 investments. We've exited around 70. Okay. 6 IPOs, 12 unicorns. So we've had a pretty strong track record, right? So look, they were looking for someone who had that network and I guess had that sort of market insights, right, to cover that region. So it is quite a broad region, but I think I have a strong network here.
You focus mostly in Thailand, Philippines, right? If I remember.
Not necessarily. I'm just spending more time there, but I'm actually looking to look into Indonesia and other markets as well, because just based on the risk reward is getting quite interesting now and appealing. So I guess that's a quick intro, a bit about me.
I mean, it's a good intro.
Yeah.
I think you forgot a big chunk of it. You're also an actor.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a bit about the angle, right? So it sort of all started when, my family, my sister's been in the entertainment industry for quite a few years, right? So I sort of fell into that, right? Not in a bad way, in a good way, right? And then sort of, being in finance and being in technology, I just thought about ways how I can leverage that and, the tech and media insights, because not many people have that in Asia, right? There's probably 5 people in Asia that have that advantage of the tech side at a high level and then the media side at a high level, right? So for me, I mean, it's all about technology still, right? But it's just finding ways to leverage.
So creative outlet to do acting, right?
Correct. I mean, it's more as so, building that distribution engine as well.
Okay, fair enough.
So
So basically, you're building the Richie brand, Richard Armstrong brand, and then everything else is just a result of that.
Look, I don't think it's more about that. I think, going in and offering a competitive advantage where I guess other venture capitalists can't offer, right? For example, what can that be? That can be as I say, you offer this massive distribution channel in a certain market, which I guess no other VC can compete with, or maybe it's the network you can tap in a specific creator in a specific vertical, things like that, right?
Yeah, I know that you're kind of like an operator, investor as well, right?
Yeah.
You get quite involved with your deals. I don't know how you managed to get involved with 70 deals at the same time.
No,
I'm sure
look, I mean,
favor a
look,
few, right?
I mean, as I say, it's managing that active portfolio is takes quite a bit of time, right? You know, the over 70 company portfolio it's more, those are relatively small checks, but there's probably about 10 to 15 I, catch up with on a monthly basis and things like that, just to like analyze, see what they can help. Because to be honest, most of the founders in my network, or most of the ones I've backed, they only come to me when they need something, right? Maybe it's an intro to Pacific Investor on their follow-on round, or maybe it's a marketing expert they could, connect with, things like this, right? So usually these founders, they can figure it out, right? But they usually like, but if they need something, I'm usually the first person they call. So yeah.
Okay. And so I know that you have a relatively large following, so I know that that's an offer of yours as well. When you jump into a deal, specifically when it matches your audience, you're able to either leverage your audience or leverage your connections in the influencer world as well, right?
I think it has to be a match as well, right? So like, for example, I've been spending a lot of time in the Philippines. So for example, we're working on launching an ice cream brand, right?
Which is called?
It's called Gusta Gelato. It's coming out soon.
Cool.
So I guess that makes sense from a market fit, right?
Of course.
But if it was like something random in like another market, then it probably wouldn't make sense. But the reason I guess the Philippines makes sense is the demographics is quite high for that market.
Right.
And I'm spending probably like every month or every month and a half, let's say a week, I aim to spend there, right?
So how do you pick your deals then? Because you're saying like some of them match, some of them don't. Like you obviously have certain deals that you like to work on. How do you pick them? I
think, I'll, to be honest, if I'm being frank, a lot of the investments I get now, the founders spend time, I usually get warm intros, right? Or warm intros, or they, from my network or something like this. I mean, occasionally you get the one that cold emails you, right? Or something like this. That's always good as well, because I mean, the fact that they managed to find your email already shows that, they're a bit of a hustler, right? I mean, if they just sent me a, just a generic, but in terms of like just a standard message, right? Then there's no real sort of thing in that. So what I do is like, I sort of like funnel it out, the ones that can find me first or get a warm intro or whatever. I think that's sort of like one tick. And then, sort of like, as I spend more time, I try to meet all the founders I like that I'm quite active on, spend quite a bit of time with. I try to at least meet them like once or twice in person before I sort of decide. And then what I usually do is I say, hey, look, because the goal, the sort of angle for me is that, I might do a relatively small check, but I can more or less fill you around, right? That's sort of the goal, right? I say to you, hey, you let me in this, and then, let's close this, right? Because it's
so
more or less.
So what kind of check are you getting in usually?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends, right? We've done anywhere from like, I've done anywhere from like a couple K to even like set up like SPVs on like hundreds thousand, So
just to get,
it sort of depends.
Your foot in the door.
Exactly, because I mean, I do have aspirations to potentially in a few years, whenever the market is right, and I guess you have that sort of angle to potentially do something as well, right? So in terms of
build your own fund, maybe
potentially, but it's still a few years off. I'm mainly just building the.
24 years old. I think you have a bit of time.
Yeah. I mean, look, but you want, if you get an opportunity, you should grab it, right? So yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, there's no time like today.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So you mentioned your criteria are the fact that the founder reaches out to you. So somewhat proactive. Yeah. That's one of the criteria. Yeah. Anything else? Like any verticals you look at in particular? Or?
To be honest, it's I would say it's less so, more on the, the vertical side. I mean, for me, I just look for the best founders wherever they are. It's as simple as that. It's actually similar thesis to the fund. Okay. We focus on, as I say, no matter if a founder is in, let's say, Mexico or in Bangkok, like we're happy to chat with them. Okay. I think, especially with the access of technology and things like this right now, it's sort of, the bar has become much lower, right, for people to start a company, things like this, right? It doesn't require hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? You can get started on a couple hundred or even $1,000 just to test the market, test the product out, things like that, right? So I think it's sort of more about that. So we're not, like, for me, I'm not any sector agnostic or geography agnostic. I mean, if it's a great founder, I would back him from a pitch deck.
Anything like for me, for example, I work exclusively with B2B founders. Do
Yeah.
you have that kind of
No.
differentiation?
No, I've invested in B2B, I've invested in B2C, I've invested, because what I've sort of figured out is a lot of these models, right, they may start off in a particular sector, but then they end up pivoting.
Sure, that happens,
like majority of the times, right? So I think at pre-seed and seed, you're focused on just backing great people, people, who are tackling big markets, right, that have that unique insight in the market. It's not necessarily, I mean, traction is great and things like that, but that's more seed, Series A, things like this, right? I mean, that is great to do as well. There's a market for that. But yeah, I mean, at the stage where I mainly spend time on, it's all about people. So yeah.
Yeah. So, you're an interesting person to talk to right now, because most of the founders I speak to, usually B2B founders, and we talk about ways to scale, like what strategies they're leveraging to scale their businesses and stuff like that. I'm a lot about personal branding, founder-led sales, and all that. You've obviously figured out a way to scale yourself so that now most of the deals are coming to you inbound.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you got there? You're 24 years old. How did you build your brand?
I think, at the beginning, right, is very venture capital is a very closed ecosystem. As they say, if you're outside the ecosystem, you don't really know, you ask like an average person, what is venture capital? They'll be like, it's very hard to know, right? But in terms of, I was sort of like that at the beginning, but then as I learned to get more and more into it, it wasn't my intention to go in venture capital. I mean, I did, like after a while, I did like, okay, yeah, I think this is the right fit for me, right? But it's sort of at the beginning, I just wanted to talk to as many people as possible, right? Get to know as many people as possible on the social, like, the social person I am, things like this, right? So it was more like, and then what I would do is I would, meet with many people, and then I would speak to many people, and then not necessarily, and then these people, right, I meet, I'll try keep connections with them and stuff like this. And what sort of happened over time was, I met great people out of it, and I did help them in different ways, right? And what I realized is a lot of people, some, actually not a lot, quite a decent amount of people would help back as well. So a few people opened doors for me as well to sort of get in the ecosystem. But I think the reason why, I guess, I've become like sort of one of the first people that I guess a person that starts a company would go to is because I guess founders it's a very small community, right? And if you can add value for that founder, it's massive, right? These founders talk, they start new companies and things like this. So I've been able to do that quite a few times. So you're like the first check, kind of the People talk your name and they say, okay, Richie is like the first check for Well, I probably have quite a few other people as well, right, in the ecosystem in Southeast Asia. But I mean, a lot of the companies.
That's a good brand, though.
Yeah, I mean, they would come to me, like I backed the company where it's like, the founders left, and then I got an intro. One of his good friends, things like this, is starting a business, right? So it's things like that. But back to the point about venture as a ecosystem, it's still, like, as I say, not a lot of people know about it, right? People think buy side, and they think like, private equity, hedge funds, things like this, right? But venture capital, especially in emerging markets, it's a still very early ecosystem. Yeah. So it's, if you think it's closed off in the US and Europe, it's even more closed off here, right? So when I was like, getting into that, it was very like, okay, I didn't know who to speak to, I didn't know who I could raise money from. But now, for example, majority of the funds I know, majority of the angels I know. So it's if I found the founder with the right fit, right match, it's just making a few calls and sending a few messages, right? Cool. But it took time to build. Yeah,
I mean, you keep saying time, but you're 24, so you got in really early.
I started early, right? So.
And so your track record is what, like 4 or 5 years in venture cap?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I've been investing 4 years probably.
4 years.
Yeah, I'd say vintage is probably 2019. Yeah, 2019.
Any exits or?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a few, but I mean, it's still like just like I won't say the exact numbers, but I mean, I would say it's top 1-2% of funds. Like if you look at the sort of the IRR, IRR, MOIC, things like that. So yeah.
Very good. Well, congrats. And you're only getting started. Like 70 companies in the pipeline, right?
Look, I think for me, as I say, right, it's just, and the entry point really matters as well, right? Because if you go in at like 30, 40, 50 million, it's very hard to generate returns.
It's almost like spray and pray, except you do a bit more due diligence.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's not. Yeah, I love that sort of thing, right? What they say, spray and pray, right? But I think it's a bit more targeted than that, right?
Of
I mean,
course.
I spend
Plus, you bring the value.
correct,
And all,
correct. So like, you know, I think when you say spray and pray and you go into like a 30, 40 post, then there's a bit of an issue,
Yeah, yeah.
right? You know, okay, some may work out and they become outliers, but I guess the US and European markets, they've been able to justify those valuations, right? Whereas in Southeast Asia and other markets, you know, we haven't had $10 billion outcomes yet, you know, so it's sort of a different perspective.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but you know, going in early, entry point really matters, especially in emerging markets.
So speaking of like the fact that we haven't reached $10 billion valuations, exits and all that,
Yeah.
my whole concept is next big wave, right? I believe Southeast Asia is the next big wave, is going to take over eventually.
Yeah.
Any, you know, ideas on when that's going to happen? Like, do you see trends going on in Southeast Asia that are sort of accelerating a bit of velocity in the deals?
I mean, this is my sort of job, right? To sort of look for, you know, the you know, what's interesting, not now, but what's interesting in 5 to 10 years. So, I mean, when you think about that, it's like, you know, what trends? So, I mean, if you wanted to look at it from, I guess, a high level, you could look at things, what did well in the West 5, 10 years ago, and then that'll apply. But then there's actually some industries in, you know, Southeast Asia that are actually even more advanced, right?
Like
so, I mean, think about the creator economy, for example, right? For me, I'm having that sort of, you know, front row view of the creator economy growing. I feel like Thailand can be the next Korea. Especially in the influencer economy and things like this. If you look at a lot of the movies production, things like this, there's a lot of these like actors and actresses and things like this becoming not just famous in Thailand, but famous on the global stage, right? So, and if you look at the GDP spending in Thailand, it's, you know, getting past that middle class income threshold, right? So yeah, for example, that is an example of something that they're ahead of. Something that maybe they're not ahead of is maybe software. Right, SaaS is a software. In Europe, US, you have many SaaS companies that get 100, 200, 300 million ARR. The bar is still relatively hard for that in Asia.
Why do you think that is?
Thailand
People
as well.
struggle to spend on
It's
SaaS
to be honest,
businesses?
because I mean, if you look at the you know, the financials, the balance sheets of certain companies, public or not, right? See how much they're spending on software. Right, and then compare that to a US or European.
So,
company.
since I have you here, like a few of the founders I work with, actually a lot of the founders I work with are SaaS founders.
Yeah.
And they're still struggling to get that, like they bring the ROI and all, right?
Yeah.
But they're still struggling to get the companies to put that credit card down or whatever
That's
you
the
all
thing,
have
right?
done. And like,
It's
how
like-
do we change that mentality in your mind?
I think it's very hard, right?
Of course.
Because I think it's like, you know, sort of that sort of like changing the consumer behavior, or more or less changing the enterprise behavior, right? That takes time, you know. But I mean, I do think Thailand has, out of sight, Singapore, Thailand probably has the best opportunity to get to that level, right? Because if you look at the sort of like, you know, companies here, they are growing quite fast, right? Especially, and there's a lot of legacy businesses. But I mean, it's like there's a ceiling, right? So I still think over the next 5 years, 10 years, we're not going to see 200, 300 million ARR SaaS companies, even 100 million SaaS companies. But I think we'll see 10, 20, 30. But then it just depends how you sort of look at your, you know, your cap table, your financials, your burn rate, things like this, to sort of justify the, you know, the entry point and exit point, right? Whereas if you get in a SaaS company, like a 1 or 2 posts, and then, you know, you grow to like 20, 30 million ARR in 3, 4 years, 100 million exits it's still, you know, 40x, right? Let's say after dilution. But I mean, if you go in at, you know, 20 or something like this, you know, you might as well just invest in the S&P. So yeah.
No, from the investor standpoint, I get it's really tough, but I'm looking at it from the founder standpoint.
Yeah.
Right? Like all these SaaS companies basically are focusing on digital transformation.
Yeah.
And Southeast Asia is focusing on digital transformation. I feel there's just a gap, a dissociation from their initiatives and the ability to pay for SaaS solutions that are going to help them through that. So I just don't get how we bridge that gap. Because they're willing to pay if they're sold via like, you know, enterprise sales teams and all, but like SaaS itself is tough.
Okay, this is
self-serve, you know.
Yeah, this is maybe one way you could maybe fix it, or maybe it might take some time. But if you can, for example, you know how in the US, like let's say the reason why you get software is, let's say you, out of $1, you produce around $2 or $3, right? I think if the ROI is like 5x or 10x here, then I think that's the way how you can do it, right? And
And I know the problem with that.
Correct. It's hard, but in a way, but if you think about it, I mean, who is buying the software, right? It's mainly the late stage tech companies. It's very hard to get legacy companies involved to
because
use
the cost of human capital is so low.
Correct.
That's the big problem here.
Yeah, I mean, look, inflation is another big issue, right? I mean, we could probably talk all day about that. I was just actually, over the weekend, I was actually looking into like the McDonald's index, right? Of the price of McDonald's in the
Big
US.
Mac
like
index,
Big Mac, yeah. It's growing like 200% from 2019.
Yeah.
And actually, that's actually a good like key data point to look at, especially with global.
That's why I moved away from North America. Inflation.
No, but in Southeast Asia, at least salaries are catching up in other markets, right?
The official numbers are kind of like flat in Southeast Asia compared to North America.
Yeah. But I mean,
depends on the country. In Thailand specifically.
Yeah. I mean, in other markets, there's great businesses like, for example, Kopi Kenangan in Indonesia, right? I mean, my friend, he runs one of the early stage funds in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, right? Called Competetive, right? He started a fund with the Kopi founder.
Okay.
He was a good friend of mine, the GP, and the whole sort of business idea around that was that, if a cup of coffee costs 30% of the median salary, how are you going to justify that, right? So that gave an opportunity for, Kopi to enter the Indonesia market.
What gets you excited, by the way, in terms of businesses in Southeast Asia, and like a specific sector or like any businesses you've looked into recently that you were really pumped about?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few, right? Maybe I'll just share maybe a few trends I'm seeing, right? I mean, obviously, I still think marketplaces is going to play a massive, option, especially in Southeast Asia. I think there's a lot more appealingness for consumer, right? Because if you look at sort of like GDP per capita across the region, Thailand's like $8,000, Indonesia's like 4 or 5. It's getting there. Vietnam's like 2, 3, around Philippines like 3.
Yep.
Singapore obviously is massive. Vietnam is still very early. So if you look at these markets, right? And you look at sort of like things like, the sort of the things which people need. It's not really, they don't really need like, the nice to haves, right? People are not focused on the nice to haves. They're more focused on, housing, basic financial things and things like this, right? I mean, I'll give you an example. I spoke to quite an interesting company recently, which made a lot of sense to me. I don't know if I'll do the deal, but it's a great optionality, right? The company was called, they're sort of building like I don't know if you heard of JAR in India. So essentially what they've done is they're sort of a savings app.
Okay.
But using gold, right? So someone wants to build that in Thailand, actually.
Cool.
And sort of build a regional app. But what really interests me about that company is that, if you look at consumer debt levels in Thailand and across the region, it's some of the highest, right? And that's a big issue. And I think a lot of fintech companies have been trying to tackle it in a wrong angle.
By providing more loans?
That and...
Guilty.
That and... it's in a way, right? But anyways, but I think in terms of, to really educate the customer or educate the user, you have to offer something that the customer becomes a no-brainer for them. And people don't really see equities, stock, ETFs. It's more for like US and European markets, right? What do people care about here? Gold.
Crypto.
For example. Yeah, crypto is debatable, right? But gold, right? As I say, if you think about it, you talk to an average Thai person, they're like, oh, okay, they want to save up, buy gold, things like this.
I didn't know that.
Right? So if you look at the angle to they're trying to tackle it, it's like, for example, this is a good way to maybe penetrate the market because usually gold and things like this, you can only, I think at minimum you have to spend is like 5,000 baht to buy even a small piece of gold and go even higher. Imagine if you're like the average, let's say person in Bangkok, they're able to save, buy 100 baht or 200 baht of gold each week.
So you fractionalize it.
Correct. But not just that, and then they're able to secure it, everything like this, and then sort of like that auto saving. And then if you add in the because Southeast Asia, the financial literacy rate is still very early, right?
Sure.
Compared to other markets. But I think this is a way how we can educate the market,
Yep,
right?
I like
and
it.
sort of tackle it from a different angle. And I feel like that can be a product that could be mass market, right? Because you need volume, but that's something like you ask anyone in Thailand, they'll say gold, 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 like above anything, right? The reason why they like gold, in sort of bear markets, bull markets, gold is valuable, right? So sort of digitizing that offering for the new, and in India it's been proven I think they're worth about $500 million right now. So yeah, so no one's done that in Southeast Asia.
So I have a question for you. We're both in Thailand, right?
Yeah.
And both in the startup ecosystem.
Yeah.
You're on the venture side. I'm on the building side.
Yeah, back to building, right?
Yeah, building or at least helping people build right now. Trying to scale that.
Yeah.
But a question that comes up a lot from people in and out of Thailand are, why aren't there more funds in Thailand? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's, sort of pretty like straightforward, to be honest. I mean, if you look at the ecosystem, every ecosystem, you need to have like sort of, investors at different stage, right? For example, you have pre-seed, you have angel investors, you have pre-seed, you have seed, Series A, Series B, Series C, pre-IPO growth, even after IPO, right? But in Thailand, on the other hand, it's a bit different. I mean, you sort of have angels that do like small checks, and then you have CVCs that do 2-3 million, right? A startup doesn't really need the latter, because like there's not that many that get to that stage, at scale. And then at the early days, a lot of it can be F&F, right? So what's missing is sort of the pre-seed seed stage. I think what do you call it, 500 did a good job with that, but then it's sort of like
why'd they leave?
I don't know, right? I don't know why they left, but I guess a lot of funds, they have LP mandates and things like this. But I mean, if I was to do something, I mean, I did sort of dabble in potentially an idea of starting a small fund for Thailand, but the market wasn't right, and it didn't really make sense. Even like let's say a $1 or $2 million fund,
right?
Because I think the ecosystem needs it, right? Think about it. You did 100K, 20 companies. Or 15 companies. I think it would be a net. It would be a positive for the ecosystem. So yeah.
Yeah. Do you think there's like a lack of founder mentality in Thailand, or it's something else?
To be honest, I think there's great founders in Thailand as well, but it's sort of like, every ecosystem you sort of need a group before that, right? For example, in the US, you have like the PayPal mafia.
Yeah.
Right. Which, they went on to start like great companies like Affirm, many others in the sort of defense space, in the, Tesla.
All over,
yeah. Many cool companies, right? And then every ecosystem needs that. In Europe, you have the Revolut mafia.
Sure.
And then you have the
Klarna
Wise
mafia.
mafia.
Yeah.
Well, still getting there.
Yeah.
Wise
Yeah.
Wise mafia as well. A lot of them have went to start new companies. In Southeast Asia, you sort of had the Grab one, but it's still
Lazada mafia.
Yeah, the Lazada. I think we're waiting for the next ecosystem. Like we're waiting for the likes of e-commerce to IPO here.
Is that happening in your opinion?
I think there's friends of mine. So like in terms of, I think let's say, I'm hoping 80.
Fingers crossed, let's say.
Yeah, because I mean fingers crossed, because then the founders can do more deals than me and stuff like that, right?
But okay, so you're mentioning like these ecosystem builders basically, and I completely agree with you. But look at the difference between Thailand and Indonesia for some reason. Like what happened there?
Yeah, I think the way, it's sort of Indonesia started coming back to reality now, right? In terms of the market landscape, valuations are becoming very interesting. I mean, I spoke to a company very strong. I mean, they're doing around 16 million in revenue. Like a top line, right? And it's like a 1 or 2x multiple to the market, right? If you spoke to that same company, or you spoke to a similar company in a similar vertical like 2-3 years ago, that company would probably be like 10x the valuation,
right?
Or 10x the multiple, right? So I guess Indonesia, why a lot of investors looked at it even during the ZERP period, was because the valuations were very good, were high, but they say money was free back then, right? So it was ZERP season, right? And then for example, and they just viewed, big TAM, 270 million people, this can be $1 billion company, right? But we haven't really seen that outcome proven. I mean, the biggest outcome we've seen in Southeast Asia, let's say cash on cash or cash on equity as well, like is probably like 2C2P, right? Which is like 500 million. So I mean, if you're like an investor and you're going in at like $100 million valuation, you know, I mean, you're probably looking at a 3-4x return, right? Potentially. I mean, it's very hard to, like, I mean, we haven't seen it yet, and I don't think we'll see it in the next 5-10 years. I mean, that's why sort of my thesis and early stage, I mean, what I look at, you know, in my, you know, I sort of have it in my portfolio, what I look at in the sort of the thesis, right? I try to get in, my sort of thesis is that the valuation we'll see in emerging markets sort of between, like, let's say cash DPI returns for funds to from, you know, companies is like 100 to 300 million range, right? So what does that mean? It means as an investor you have to get in like sub 5 million, you know, even 10, you know, but then you have some opportunistic deals where you're just investing for, you know, track record as well. So yeah.
Right. And kind of like to segue away from the ventures itself, like, do you have a country or a group of countries you're more bullish on in Southeast Asia?
Okay, sorry, I thought you were going to say like globally.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
I'm trying to focus on Southeast Asia.
Got it.
Globally,
yeah.
I'm sure there's an opinion there, and we can get into that in
Brazil,
a minute.
Mexico, very interesting.
Fair.
Yeah, but
that was direct. Like, anything as impactful in Southeast Asia, or not really?
I would say Thailand still.
Yeah.
You know, for me, Thailand, Philippines, I think is getting there as well. You know, obviously I've done a few deals in the Philippines, but in terms of Indonesia, so those 3 markets have been.
Okay, so still bullish on Indonesia.
I wasn't as bullish before because just based on the risk reward, right? For now.
So now that it's simmered down.
Because what I'm seeing a lot of recaps and things like this where you know these companies raise at 30, 40, and now they're raising at 5 or 10.
Right.
You know, it's just complete recap, more like.
But with the same opportunities in.
And more or less 2-3x growth rate. Maybe they're at break even already.
Okay.
You know, so it's sort of a different dynamic, and then it says, I still think Thailand's still massive, the opportunity, but I do think you know, I'd probably say Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines.
Oh.
Philippines I like because I mean, you know, if you look at the internet penetration rate, it's one of the highest in the world.
Yeah.
Right.
English.
Yeah, English is like, you know, is spoken like they're one of the best in English. And also, you know, a lot of industries in like, you know, I think consumers, they're going to play a massive part. You know, so I think we'll see a lot of marketplaces come out of there in particular areas as well.
Very niche marketplaces.
Very niche.
Talked about it
but
before.
you know, that are sort of community built even maybe.
So around the creator economy.
Correct. I think creators will pay interesting market because I mean, sort of my thesis, the angle, I mean, the general thesis for creators is that usually a lot of the value is only accrued by 1% of the overall creators, right? But in this case, I'm sort of looking and I'm seeing that, okay, how can we find a way to let creators earn more, right? And it could be other ways as well, because it's like, let's take Spotify as an example, right? If you're an artist on Spotify, if you're not the top creator, you know, you don't make that much,
right?
You know, so. But I think there is a way how we can get creators more involved in the ecosystem. But it doesn't necessarily have to be tens of millions of dollars they make, right? But if you look at sort of the wage, the average wage and things like this, it could at least 4 or 5x their wage, and you know, just the sort of the minimum wage in these certain markets, right?
Yeah,
so
just elevate them from their current CPM, and that's
correct. Yeah, it's sort of increasing that. So I think, you know, we'll see a lot of consumers there.
I like that.
And it's Indonesia's the Philippines, Indonesia, and Thailand are very heavily influencer-driven markets. Right. It's like in the West, it's, you know, it's not as driven and things like this. Sort of the.
Or it's more.
It's more less, I'd say. So,
yeah. Cool. So just to end things, anything you want to shout out selfishly as much as you want?
No, I think it's all good. I mean, like, you know, as I said, thanks for having me on, Tim. Really appreciate it. You know, obviously we've known each other for a decent while now. Love what he's working on, and as I say, anything I can help, let me know. And obviously I'll have maybe have a few of my portfolio companies involved on this, and then see how.
I'll give you some details, and you can take a look and see if your portfolio would fit in. I'll happily give you a deal on that as well.
Yeah, for sure. That's
and similarly, like, you know, I'm obviously going to be collecting data with the founders I'm working with. And the idea is to leverage that data and help investors make better decisions into investing in my pool of talent as well. So that might be something I want to look into.
So you're starting an accelerator soon?
Yeah, ish.
Dabbling.
We'll see.
Dabbling.
At least the data will be there.
Maybe actually just before we finish off, there's one company that you might want to speak to. It's actually quite interesting. It's a portfolio company of mine as well. So if you look at certain markets, right, you know, if you look at certain, I think I mentioned it to you before, but what they're building, you know, they're buying brands, right?
Okay.
But they're not doing that in a, you know, like co-owner brands, right? So I mean, if you look at the model, right, if you look at a lot of SME businesses, they're too small for private equity and they're not venture scalable, right? So there's no liquidity market unless they want to get a loan from the bank or something.
I've been talking to some kids quite a bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So right, I mean, so essentially they figured out a way how to offer liquidity for SMEs.
Yep.
So that's something quite interested. And there's something. I mean, they're not exactly the same as team shares, but you know, I think it's adapted and things like that. So that's something I'm excited on, but a couple others as well. But yeah, you already know them. I'm sure you have them on soon as well.
Sounds good, man.
Anyways,
Richie, thanks.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks for being on. Take care.
Let's keep in touch.